to America's Vote 2024 and our special coverage of Super Tuesday. All night, we're going to have all of the latest results from the 15 states that are holding competitions today for Republicans and Democrats, plus Democrats in the American Samoa. Roughly 1/3 of all of the delegates needed to clinch the Republican nomination are at stake. For the GOP, former President Donald Trump appears to be the dominant frontrunner, but challenger Nikki Haley is staying in the fight. And as a result, Trump will not be able to reach the 1,215 delegate threshold that would make him the Republican presumptive nominee, but he could be poised to get a whole lot closer by the end of Super Tuesday. Joining me for this half hour, the Hill's all-star team of journalists, Cate Martel, author of the 1230 Report newsletter, Julia Manchester, host of What's America's Thinking on The Hill TV, and Brett Samuels, White House reporter for The Hill. They have been checking in with their sources all day long, and we're going to get to all of that. But we want to start with breaking news. Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema released a video late this afternoon announcing that she will not seek re-election.
I believe in my approach, but it's not what America wants right now. Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year.
Arizona is a crucial battleground state. Kyrsten Sinema, originally a Democrat, then an independent, and now Julia Manchester, she says she's not going to run.
Yeah, well, it's a good day if you're Ruben Gallego. I think this is very good for Democrats. I mean, there was really very much the fear that Sinema, as an independent, if she were to run with Kari Lake, Ruben Gallego, she would essentially split that Democratic ticket. So good day for Gallego. I'm interested to see how Republicans approach this, though. I mean, they're going to continue to paint Gallego as ultra-progressive, ultra-radical. But at the same time, Kari Lake has obviously been painted and has presented herself in many ways as radical.
We're going to come back to Arizona as well as some of the other races that we're watching tonight, California, North Carolina. But let's start with the presidentials. Nikki Haley, Donald Trump, Joe Biden. What's at stake tonight for all three of them? So
for Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I mean, they're expected to very much sweep this primary tonight, respectively. I think for Joe Biden, there's a lot of chatter about what does the uncommitted vote look like? What does it look like in a state like Minnesota? I think in Michigan got more attention because Michigan's such a consequential swing state where an uncommitted vote in the general could play a big role. But for Joe Biden, I think it's going to be a good night. For Donald Trump, he wants to be able to say, I don't have to worry about Nikki Haley in the rearview mirror. I am focused solely on Joe Biden. But we don't know how Nikki Haley is going to perform tonight. She's likely not going to win majorly or win a state. She could. North Carolina, Virginia, we're watching those states, maybe Massachusetts, some of the left-leaning states. But it's going to be difficult for her because Donald Trump has all of the wind at his back.
I want to get more into Nikki Haley's supporter, but first I want to bring in Brett Samuels. For Democrats, Brett, there are at least 7 states, Julia alluded to this, where progressives have mobilized an effort to vote uncommitted against Biden because of his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. Is the Biden campaign worried?
I would say that they're definitely taking this seriously, Kevin. Biden campaign officials have told me that they're aware that this could be a problem for them going forward, especially, as Julia mentioned, in swing states like Michigan. So I think that they'll be closely monitoring how strong that uncommitted vote is tonight.
And Cate Martel, I mean, you hear that, and 1 in 7 of the Democrats in Michigan who voted in that primary voted uncommitted. Really, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib showing that she's able to mobilize. But if you're the Democrats, and as you're speaking to Democratic strategists, what specifically are they saying that they'll be able to coalesce and unify the party in a general election?
Yeah, Kevin, I think what's interesting to note is how the Biden administration, the Biden campaign is acknowledging this uncommitted vote. They're not necessarily attacking the voters that went out and voted uncommitted because they understand the concerns that these voters have. And they're leaning into it and are saying that we are doing everything that we can to try to call for a ceasefire and everything that we can do to help with humanitarian aid in Gaza. So I think by the Biden administration and campaign trying not to alienate these democratic fears from people on the left, I think is going to help them. But they do need to find a way to have something material that they can tell these Democrats that we hear you and we are going to act.
So, Julia, when you when you hear all of that for what's happening on the left, then we pivot back to the right.
Yeah.
Then you mentioned specifically Virginia. And I've got my eye on Virginia tonight to see specifically just what Nikki Haley's ceiling is. Now, it's a long shot for her to become the Republican nominee. But if she's able to garner 20%, 30%, 40% of the vote in any state, it sends a signal, does it not, that the Republican Party is not completely coalesced behind Trump, and that could have an impact in a general election.
Absolutely, especially in a state like Virginia, where you saw Glenn Youngkin, who kept Donald Trump at arm's length in 2021, was able to do so well. But for Nikki Haley and Donald Trump, look, we're going to look at different parts of Virginia. First of all, Northern Virginia, Fairfax County, Loudoun County. You have a lot more moderate Democrats, moderate Republicans, independents. Those could help Haley going forward. The suburbs of Richmond, obviously, that's good for Haley if they come out in droves. Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach, that's definitely a swing area. And it normally is a swing area when it's Virginia politics in a statewide race. But even if Haley were to perform very well in all of those areas, give or take Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach, if Donald Trump is able to drive up the margins west of Charlottesville, talking about as we get closer to West Virginia and those areas, that's where his strength lies. And that's where Glenn Youngkin's lies, too.
I want to follow up with you on this. No one's suggesting that she's going to be able to clean house tonight and win all the Super Tuesday. But if Trump isn't able to attract those 20% of the AP poll that I just saw, 20% of Republicans who say no way, no how, they're never going to vote for Trump. Is that a problem? How does Trump either turn out more of his base or attract even a fraction of them in a general election?
It's a problem in that it gives Nikki Haley a reason to stay in the race for that much longer, in that she's still in the back of Donald Trump's mind, and Donald Trump can't focus solely on Joe Biden. He has to split his attention between Nikki Haley, Joe Biden, his legal issues. He's going to have trouble there.
Well, Brett Samuels, who's still with us, White House reporter Brett Samuels. I mean, Julia just mentioned the legal issues. Well, a big part of those legal issues were cleared up by the Supreme Court of the United States, which ruled earlier this week that, in fact, Colorado had to count those votes on the ballot. How decisive of a victory legally was this for the Trump campaign and the former president?
Yeah, huge win for the Trump campaign with that Supreme Court ruling, unanimous 9-0, restoring him back to the ballot in Colorado. The former president came out, gave remarks about this, praised the Supreme Court for this. This is a big win for him. He can, basically not have to worry about any concerns moving forward that other states may also try to look at removing him from the ballot on the 14th Amendment. So now he can worry about his other legal problems, which are certainly numerous, including the upcoming Supreme Court hearing over presidential immunity. But in the meantime, one less hurdle for the Trump campaign to worry about as they look for a sweep here on Super Tuesday.
And the Democrats, Brett Samuels, they're saying that they, in fact, really wanted nothing to do with this court case all along. And the president himself saying that they were anticipating for this ruling. Were they not?
Yeah, at the end of the day, Democrats have said they want to beat Trump at the ballot box. They don't want to have to worry about the potential fallout of the courts removing him and all the ripple effects that would have. That would just further embolden Trump, further embolden his base, who already view him as a victim of, the swamp, quote unquote, the courts, Washington, et cetera. So I think for Democrats now, they can fully focus on beating Trump in November at the ballot box. And that's, all along where I think this was headed.
And this was very well timed for former President Trump, particularly in Colorado, by, pulling off the teeth of pulling him off the ballot. But could not have been better timed. Colorado voters are heading to the polls tonight, and now that Trump had this major victory, that's certainly going to help him. Brett had an interesting point too, that a lot of Trump supporters, have been looking and saying that Trump is this victim. There's been this witch hunt, and I think that's been energizing a lot of his base. And now this gave him, I think, a pretty big victory heading into it, but also with all of these other pending cases going on for all of Trump's cases, particularly the Supreme Court immunity case that's going to be coming up. I think that this is going to be fascinating to watch, and how much does this actually affect him, and what independents and what does his base think.
And Kate, the 1230 report's been all over this because you've got the complete reverse happening on each side. You've got Trump's base coalescing behind him, and you've got the Democrats' base revolting against their standard bearer.
Yeah, and it's...
Wow.
Yeah, and you just look at, how do we get here? And this is like the moment that I keep having that on either side, you look at Democrats, and a lot of Democrats are not thrilled with President Biden, particularly because of his age. And then you look on the right and you see that, a lot of Republicans are not thrilled about former President Trump. And those are the two standard bearers that we're looking at for the general election.
And Julia Manchester, earlier this week, there were those trial balloons from No Labels that they might be able to attract Nikki Haley. Eventually, and I'll be blunt with you, I've spoken with several sources who tell me that that is a very real thing, and that there are donors, many of whom are now conservatives, but who were earlier never Trump or Republican donors who want that to happen. Is that wishful thinking, or is there a viable path for her to pursue that should she want it?
So I'm just going to start off by saying Nikki Haley said last week she has not spoken to No Labels. She does not want to do a unity party with a Democratic ticket. Now, that's what she said. We know that a lot of people say things and then things change. No Labels echoed that, saying we haven't been in contact with her, but I do know that the head of No Labels told you that they would be open to that.
Been talking
yes. Yeah. So definitely mixed messaging there. Well, definitely mixed messaging there, but I think what it shows you is how fraught Nikki Haley's political future is going forward. Because if she were to go down the path of No Labels, that means that she has to break the RNC unity pledge, run with a Democrat. What does that mean in a pro-Trump party going forward? Probably not good for her.
It's going to be interesting to see. I want to head over to the Hill's Decision Desk headquarters, and I want to bring in Scott Tranter, who runs the Hill's Decision Desk HQ. 15 states and 1 territory voting tonight on Super Tuesday. Trump is expected to do well tonight. But talk to me about RFK Jr., because his super PAC scored a major victory, Scott, in Georgia and in Arizona.
Yeah, no, Georgia and Arizona, he's demonstrated the capability to actually get on the ballot, which is very difficult. You have to get a lot of signatures. You have to get them in certain geographic locations. It costs a lot of money. So what that tells us is that he's very capable of getting into other battleground states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And if he's on there, I don't expect him to win in those states, but he could pull 2, 3, 4, 5%. And there's some debate on whether he's pulling more from Joe Biden or more from Donald Trump. But if he pulls 2, 3, 4, 5% in some of those battleground states, that's enough to make a difference.
Well, it's definitely enough to make a difference, and we're just under 2 hours away from the first Super Tuesday polls closing. Some of the big states that are closing at 7, Vermont, Virginia, and North Carolina. No one's expecting for any major upsets, are they, Scott, based on your polling? But what information can Biden and Trump glean from each other after the votes are tallied and the results start coming in tonight?
Well, one thing I would look at, I heard you talking a little bit earlier about Virginia. One I'd keep an eye on is Vermont. We've seen some late-breaking polls there. The governor, Phil Scott, who is a back-to-back winner, endorsed Nikki Haley early on in the primary. I don't see her winning the state, but I could see her maybe getting 10, 15-point loss, which, sounds pretty crazy, but that is one of her better performances, and especially in a state like Vermont. One thing to think about is, and this is going to be the narrative, it's going to continue the narrative if she does well there, that she's able, that Donald Trump's not able to lock up all the Republican voters. Look for her to overperform in a state like Vermont and Virginia. Again, Donald Trump most likely going to get all the delegates tonight and be well on his way to get all the delegates he needs to clinch the nomination over the next few weeks. But Nikki Haley is going to probably have a strong showing tonight, potentially in a Vermont or Virginia.
And on the Democratic side, this uncommitted vote, which counties and which parts of the country and these states where there are efforts to vote for an uncommitted should we be paying attention to?
So the one I'm looking into is Mecklenburg, North Carolina, right? North Carolina is a state in which Joe Biden is going to try and make competitive this cycle, especially when in places like Michigan, which is going to look competitive for Donald Trump. And so we're looking at a Mecklenburg, North Carolina, because that is going to be symbolic for some of the other important states. That is a upper middle class, college educated, suburban county in a place that Joe Biden's going to need to do well if he's going to win this fall. So that's the one I'm looking at, especially in the uncommitted vote. If they can come out and they can show what they showed in North Carolina, what they showed in Michigan, that'll tell us that'll give us some insight into the fall.
Scott, the only thing that folks in North Carolina, the bigger battle, I should say, is the Duke-UNC game this weekend, but I will leave it there to table that. We're just around the corner from March Madness. But in terms of the policy areas, Scott, that folks are really paying attention to, there's been a shift in this cycle. We've been talking about it for weeks now, and that is that immigration is issue number one. For millions of Americans, it's actually surpassed the economy. So in order to sway undecided voters, by your data, how is immigration factoring into and playing into independent and swing voters?
Look, right now, as you pointed out, immigration is the number one issue. It's because so many of these voters are looking at other issues from the lens of immigration. Economy is still a big issue, but people are looking at it through the lens of immigration. How is that affecting their communities? How is that affecting their state's budgets? How is that affecting how they look at work and things like that? And so immigration is going to play a huge role. This is not a surprise to anybody. This was a big issue in 2022 and a big issue in 2020. But what's interesting is it's actually moving to the forefront among Democrats as Republicans. That's why we saw President Joe Biden go down to the border on the same day as Donald Trump. Usually they don't like to do those on the same day, but Joe Biden thought it was important enough that he gets those views. And that's something that was interesting to me. That's a telltale sign that this is an issue that both Democrats and Republicans are going to be fighting over this fall.
All right, Scott Tranter, just before I let you go, I got to ask you, there's a lot of contests tonight, 15 plus a U.S. territory. I mean, explain to me, take me behind the scenes for a little bit. How exactly does the Decision Desk HQ call a race?
Well, as you can see, I'm dressed a little bit comfortable tonight. We call the race lots of caffeine. Lots of caffeine. There's a couple hundred of us tonight and a couple thousand of us across the country. We're collecting results in all 15 states. We look at them very quickly. We make an analysis, and then we pipe it out to folks like you so you can understand who wins. But this is a group effort, couple thousand people, lots of caffeine, a lot of election nerds.
Scott Tranter, head of the Decision Desk HQ. Lots of caffeine, but also lots of data, crunching the numbers on us. Nobody does it better. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
You hear Cate Martel, Julie Manchester bringing back into this conversation. You hear from Scott. First of all, it's fascinating to see how they actually call these races. And for folks following along, you can go to the Decision Desk HQ right on the Hill's website. And it's a great map, great calculator, so to speak, on the delegates and everything. But I was really thought it was fascinating, Julia, to hear Scott talk about immigration and the role that that's having on undecided voters.
Oh, absolutely. You know, when I was in Iowa, and I think when we were both in New Hampshire, Kate, we talked to a lot of voters who cited immigration despite being thousands of miles away from the southern border. This is an issue that is cutting over across to other issues like crime, the economy. So it's easy for a lot of Republicans, I think, to message on this. On top of that, you're starting to see on the crime angle, you're starting to see there was that college student who was very tragically killed in Georgia, I believe last month, and Republicans have seized on that to make the case about crime. So it's one of those issues that voters are caring a lot about, and Republicans seem to be on top of it. However, we have been hearing rumblings that Biden could make a major announcement during his State of the Union. And use that bully pulpit to message on immigration.
Cate Martel, just 2 days away from that State of the Union, Thursday night at 9 Eastern. Cate Martel, RFK Jr., I mean, to hear Scott Tranter talk about it is really going to make an impact in these battleground states. And neither side, Trump nor Biden, are articulating to the voters specifically about what or how they're going to deal with that.
Yeah, I think it's quite a mistake for both sides because, you know, as Scott was mentioning, that you know, RFK is polling well among some Democrats and some Republicans who are not happy with who the likely nominees will be. And that these are voters that they should be talking to. The fact that, you know, RFK has been somebody, I think, who there have been rumblings about and, you know, a series of headlines. But I think that as far as the campaigns go, they haven't really addressed this issue much. And, you know, you see this unease that's happening with, you know, particularly the ages of both Biden and Trump, and there's this whole contingent of voters that aren't happy with either one of them.
All right, I want to flex the power of Nexstar and its more than 200 affiliates and bring in Chris Berg. He is the Vice President of Content for Nexstar's affiliate station. Chris, thanks for being here. You've traveled all over the country, talking with voters in battleground states and other swing districts. What are you looking for tonight on Super Tuesday?
Well, we're looking to see what turnout's going to be like and how that's going to impact the races across the country. We focused a lot of our efforts in this first half of the year on California and that race out there with 4 strong candidates. And turnout there for Democrats is going to be key to see if Adam Schiff can carry into first place, or is he going to be chased by Steve Garvey, or is Katie Porter going to pull one out of her hat and show up in second place out there as well? So that's the big one that I'm focused on. And then Texas also has a very interesting Democratic Senate primary that's happening with Congressman Colin Allred and Roland Gutierrez from Uvalde, Texas. That's another one that we're focusing on because that could go into a runoff. And runoffs in Texas are a funky thing. Once you have, once you're one-on-one, money matters still, but name recognition and the Hispanic vote is going to matter a lot more in Texas than people think when it comes to a runoff, if it does happen. And that's going to be very interesting tonight to see.
Chris, I want to stick with California for a second, because this jungle primary, they're calling it, and folks, what jungle primary means is that anyone can vote in it. So as long as you're registered to vote, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, because it's a jungle primary, you can participate in that. And so as they're battling it out for Senator Feinstein's seat, Chris, you've got a very strategic calculation that Adam Schiff, who is no stranger to going up against Trump and Republicans, Congressman Adam Schiff, who's trying to get that seat, he's essentially calculated that he wants to go up against Steve Garvey. So he's been running ads all throughout California saying, not going after Congresswoman Barbara Lee or Congresswoman Katie Porter. He's actually been airing ads against Steve Garvey. Garvey's name now has skyrocketed in the polls. Walk me through the calculation of that and just the messy politics of this jungle primary out in California.
And that really got the Porter campaign upset because he was, elevating Garvey into that second slot. So Adam Schiff has got a $30 million war chest, and his best bet in winning the California primary is to make sure that Steve Garvey finishes second. So he is elevating Garvey to make sure that Katie Porter doesn't finish second. And she's been running either second or third in all of our polling over the past 6 months or so. So that was the decision. And it's not a new trick. It's just a revised one, one that they brought back to the forefront again, knowing that they had an opportunity to go against a guy like Steve Garvey, who has got pretty much zero money in the bank. He's got less than $1 million, hasn't spent anything, and doesn't intend to spend any money, obviously, until he potentially finishes second. And then we're told that the cash registers will open to give him some cash to actually potentially compete in this race. But we'll see.
And those polls in California are set to close at 11 p.m. Eastern time, 169 GOP delegates up for stake. But again, that's going to be a late night for if you're following along here on the East Coast for what's happening in California. I want to head to Tar Heel country if you're a UNC fan and talk to me about the governor's race in North Carolina.
North Carolina, it's from a primary standpoint, it's pretty much not a competitive race on either side. Josh Stein, the Democrat, a moderate Democrat, part of the Cooper administration, looks to be able to win that race pretty handily. He's got about a 20-point lead or 30-point lead in most polls. So he's going to be a formidable Democratic primary winner for the Republican. The Republican is likely going to be Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. And Mark Robinson, outspoken, charismatic, being labeled as North Carolina's Donald Trump, very controversial. He wants to, has said out loud that he wants to roll back North Carolina's 12-week abortion law to eventually 6 weeks. So those dynamics, you've got a very conservative Republican who's likely to win, versus a moderate Democrat, part of the current administration in North Carolina. So we'll see if those two actually come out on top, which is likely. And that's going to be a tremendous race moving forward in North Carolina.
Hey, we're focusing on immigration specifically as a policy area. Millions of Americans care so much, so deeply about this issue. And the Texas fight, to head on back down to Texas for a second, is really that primary battle, a microcosm, Chris, of the broader Republican infighting that we're witnessing on a national scale as well. And now you throw into the mix that you've got Senator John Cornyn, who's eyeing potentially to replace Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, but you've got Paxton, the state's attorney general, trying to undercut him.
Well, that feud goes back a few years when Senator Cornyn supported George Bush to replace Ken Paxton in the primary. Paxton's called Senator Cornyn a rhino, which is a Republican in name only. And that back and forth is ongoing. So there's no love loss there. They represent two different factions of the Texas Republican Party. One a little bit more moderate, and Ken Paxton is more of the Trump wing of the Texas Republican Party. Not sure how it's all going to shake out, but Ken Paxton's a force here in Texas, and he's hinted at running against Cornyn in the primary in 26. And if that happens, Katie, bar the door, that is going to be one heck of a race. And a lot of money is going to be spent, and a lot of animus is going to be shared on both sides. And,
it's not just immigration in that part of the country, the southern U.S.-Mexico border, that's really a crisis. We were talking in the control room before coming on air just about some of your reporting, Chris, that you've done in Southern California, where you've got U.S. troops who can't train because of the poor air quality as a result of climate change. What do they tell you?
Well, the key factor here is what's been going on for years along Imperial Beach in Southern California, which is right there where the border wall meets the ocean. And on our side, it's the Imperial Beach. On the other side, it's Tijuana. And I've been there. It's quite an amazing sight to see a fence really go into the ocean about a couple hundred yards. And what happens pretty regularly is there are signs on that beach that says, do not swim in the beach because of contaminated water. And that's pretty standard for that area. But what happened about a month or so ago, we asked this in our California Senate debate, or asked about it to the candidates, including Adam Schiff, is that there was, if you recall, there was tremendous rain over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. And the water system, sewage system and the runoff system in Tijuana are connected. And they're connected, and they run into the Tijuana River, which runs along the U.S.-Mexican border. So about 14 billion gallons of raw sewage ended up in that river. And, of course, that even exacerbated the problem further. The Navy SEALs have said, that impacts their training. They either have to delay training or find other places to train because of water contamination in that area, because they're located down in the Southern California, San Diego area. It's a problem. Now, interesting enough, Adam Schiff was in San Diego this weekend and addressed the issue to San Diego residents, saying he's aware of the problem. It's a priority for him when he goes to Congress, back to Congress as a House member, but also if he does win the Senate race, he will make it a priority for them. Yeah. So it's very interesting. It's kind of funny when you ask a question in a debate and all of a sudden it becomes potential policy. That means he's reacting to the voters and the feedback.
Well, and it's just, again, the excellent reporting that's going on in that station. Chris Berg, I know you're going to be joining us all throughout the night here on Super Tuesday. Next, our Vice President for Local Content. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
I mean, Julia and Kate, just in the minute and a half that we have left, that's amazing to hear the reporting down there that's being asked in the debates and how that's impacting play out. But as we head in now, as the first polls are about to close in 90 minutes or so, final thoughts in what folks should be bracing for. Cate Martel, you first.
I'm interested to see, can Nikki Haley win any contest tonight, because she is making the argument that she wants to stay in the race even longer. These are expensive races. We talk about her thinking that she can stay in. She's already announced her leadership team in Louisiana, so she has plans to stay in at least through the end of March. But if she's not winning any of these contests, it's hard to imagine her path.
Yeah, no, obviously watching for Nikki Haley at the presidential level. How big does Donald Trump win? If Joe Biden's able to fend off that uncommitted vote, but also in California. California is really the big Democratic Senate primary of the night. So I'm curious to see whether it's going to be a Schiff-Garvey matchup. I
am very much fascinated by the jungle primary out in California. So we're going to have a lot to talk about on that. And I'm really going to be looking for that uncommitted vote to see if progressives, the far left, is able to mobilize and just the impacts that could have. That's an unknown variable. And I'm also going to be looking at Virginia to see how Northern Virginia in particular fares. Can Nikki Haley mobilize support? And does that mean that she could run on an other ticket? So there's no shortage of things to talk about. Cate Martel, author of The Hill's 1230 Report, my favorite newsletter in Washington, D.C., and of course, Julia Manchester, who is the host of What's America's Thinking. And remember, stick with us all through the night. Subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel and go to thehill.com and stick with the Decision Desk. I'm Kevin Cirilli. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you throughout the night.